If you enjoy our work, consider making a donation to mixtapestories.net or at Patreon/mixtapestories, all one word. Thank you. Mixtape Stories, creating beautiful fiction in a disappointing timeline.
Vicious rabbits never say die.
Lewis's heart raced. Hearing his people's rally cry, he expected it would be a fellow vicious rabbit, or a fellow Monticellan at least. But when he turned around, he saw a complete stranger. Lewis immediately moved for his Glock.
Whoa, easy there, General.
The man standing before him was old, somewhere in his late 70s. He was tall and had a severe look about him, like he was a funeral director.
Are you LOG?
Lewis was ready to take out a potential threat. He memorized the exits and recalled the people around him. Some of them could be sheepdogs. Lewis would take them out if needed.
No, Lewis, I'm not with the Lambs of God. My name's Robert Claiborne.
Claiborne.
The name, it was familiar to him. Now there was something familiar about that face, that permanent, grave expression.
Your wife leads the Raven Institute, and you escorted her to me in Reston.
Lewis relaxed. He remembered him now. The funeral director-looking guy, Robert Claiborne.
You're with Camp David.
I was once.
This was someone from his world, the real world. Someone who knew who he really was. Finally, someone who knew. Lewis got another ping on his iPhone. The Regent's motorcade was approaching. Torn by the sudden appearance of a fellow traveler, Lewis said,
Hey, listen, I'd love to catch up with you and all, but I've got a job to do.
The motorcade arrived. Lewis considered his options. Even if he bolted at a full sprint, he wouldn't be able to catch up with the Regent in time.
Shit.
I'm sorry to gum up your op, but there's more going on than you realize, General. I think we need a place where we can talk in private. Come.
Robert led Lewis to the building's parking garage, where a driver opened the door to a Lincoln Navigator. Lewis was puckered, ready for an ambush by bandits in the cavernous underground, but reminded himself that that didn't exist here, and he got into the SUV.
When did you emerge?
You mean like when did I arrive into this nightmare? A little over a month ago.
A little late to the party. No wonder you're a loner.
Party? So it's not just you and me?
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I became an isekai.
He gave Robert a confused look.
Isekai is what we are. We died in our world, and our consciousness migrated into our counterparts here, into this reality.
So I did die.
I'm afraid so.
He felt his gut sink. He would never see Meredith and her children again. Not in this lifetime, anyway.
How'd you buy it?
Robert asked, pulling Lewis from his doom spiral.
On the road, a few years after the war. News about Greater Monticello and the Allies in the Orange Pact spread. I was on a mission to assess the Free State of Vermont's petition to join a pact. You know about them, right?
Of course. They're one of the few states whose government didn't fall, and they managed to maintain a civil society.
Robert probably knew more about the Free State of Vermont than he did. He was part of the remnants of the federal government who sequestered themselves at Camp David when the shift hit. Their intel was invaluable to Greater Monticello's Raven Institute in their war against the Home of the Faithful. From what Meredith was willing to share with him, Camp David had operatives everywhere.
We were on our way back home when we approached a road washed out in a flood. A band of pharaohs tried to cross and we heard screaming. The family was caught in the current. I dove in to find a carriage where there was a boy whose clothes were stuck onto something. I was able to free him, but the car sank deeper. I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe. I felt myself falling deeper. And then I woke up here with a hell of a fever.
The super flu.
Yeah. How'd you know?
That's how we all arrived. Back in our world, I bought it from heart failure. No meds available. And then I awoke here on a respirator in my counterpart's body. He also got the super flu. But he'd been taking medication for our condition, and I pulled through. This was back during the height of the pandemic.
Wasn't the pandemic 5 years ago?
That's why I said you were late to the party.
And there's more of us.
There are.
Meredith!
Robert shook his head.
She was alive when you migrated, right?
Lewis nodded.
Then I'm sorry, General. The Meredith here is a native, not isekai.
How do you know that?
I'm not a multiversal cosmologist, but I figured it out over time. When I recovered, I started searching for others. Those who I knew also died in our world and had fallen ill to the superflu here. Those who checked both boxes were isekai.
Okay, well, at least we got friends.
Yeah, but there's more of them too, General.
The Regent. He committed suicide.
And he fell ill during the pandemic over here.
Lewis felt acid building in his stomach. Pastor Dan wasn't just a counterpart. He was a legitimate target. The butcher who escaped justice.
And he's here now. His home of the faithful not only continuing to exist, but turning the Republic into a theocratic police state.
That's a little reductive, but essentially correct. Shortly after the shift didn't happen here, the native Dan Patterson had come to adopt the emerging social media. You know what social media is, right? God-awful addictive thing that gives people a false sense of connection, and the AI algorithms feed them news that agrees with their worldview. It's sick, but seductive. Unlike most megachurches who relied on TV, Pastor Dan jumped on the emerging tech. He took to YouTube, started posting on Twitter hourly, and used the proceeds of his church to become an angel investor in litter. Say what you want about the genocidal bastard, his native counterpart was brilliant, and he knew how to corner his market.
Lewis nodded. The Regent was indeed brilliant, if evil. When the shift hit, Pastor Dan used the members of his congregation in Lynchburg to quickly secure the city. He formed temporary alliances, killed the opposition, and gave rousing speeches about the shift being God's retribution on a godless civilization, and that the home of the faithful were the chosen ones to cleanse the world for the second coming.
While religion all over the world had been in retreat, Pastor Dan's influence increased along with his wealth.
Social media, AI. No wonder why Gaia erupted with the shift. Lewis hadn't doubted Gaia's intention, but during the early years, he wondered if humanity would have self-corrected without the forced technological timeout. After all, its sudden absence caused the death of billions, at least according to their best estimates from explorers. Now he understood why it was necessary. As bad as the shift was, this place was far worse.
So, what have you been doing since waking up into this dumpster fire? Enjoying retirement?
We're planning.
Who's we, exactly?
Robert shifted uncomfortably.
Let's take this one step at a time, shall we?
You appear to be pretty content with this unshifted realm. You got yourself a nice SUV, a driver. You got meds to keep that heart of yours pumping, and you say you're planning while that psychotic asshole struts free and hobnobs with the president. It seems to me that you're fine with the way things are.
There's more going on than you can appreciate, General. Pastor Dan's got his sheepdog searching for people like us. Hell, they actually did pay you a visit. Fortunately, when they checked on you after the pandemic, you were your native counterpart. But the Regents leaned into the whole AI industry and is monitoring everything. We have to proceed with caution.
You do caution, Robert. You and your Camp David boys played plenty cautious, staying in the shadows while we liberated the world. Looks like some things haven't changed.
Lewis opened the door, ready to step out.
I understand this is a lot to take in, and I can see you need some time. When you're ready, get a burner. You remember what that is, right? Get a burner and call me at this number. You'll be asking for Ross, and I know you as Kona.
Robert handed him a slip of paper, and Lewis took it before stepping out of the Lincoln, as the driver turned on the engine.
We're gonna need you, General. Don't be rash and take yourself off the board by seeking vengeance.
It was eerie being back in the metro area. Frightening if Lewis was being honest with himself. Nobody from Monticello had ventured beyond Culpeper since the shift. That was the Reverend's name for it, hit over a year earlier. Much of Reston, which was just a few miles away from Dulles International, now lay in ashes. Wreckage from commercial jumbo jets careening from the skies when the first EMP struck were strewn about the exurb as Lewis and his band of vicious rabbits approached the rendezvous site on their mountain bikes. All of those passengers, all of those residents, they died not knowing what happened to the world. Seeing a sheared-off wheel of a 747 atop a minivan near the Ross Dress for Less store, the notion of hundreds of people lazily flying miles up in the air at hundreds of miles per hour now seemed fanciful. Lewis heard his scouts approach. Kendra's bike needed maintenance. They would need to find a bicycle shop on their way back. Hopefully they could find one not completely ransacked, which was another reminder. Lewis would have to start sending teams out to the necropolis of D.C. and Richmond to appropriate pre-shift material.
How's it looking, Kendra?
All clear, General. No sign of movement.
Lewis smirked. Reverend Luevano had anointed him the commandant of Monticello's defense forces and started referring to him as General Henry. It was a sad state when a washed-out lieutenant was in charge. Similarly, Kendra had just been a kid over a year ago, but after the liberation of Culpeper, she had become his second in command.
Small blessings. Those cholos from Camp David made enough noise to wake the dead riding in on their motorbikes. Head back to the lookout, and you know the drill on alerts.
Without radios, the group, which they were calling themselves the Vicious Rabbits, had come up with animal calls to alert of passers-by. Most would be non-combatant wanderers scavenging just to survive, but bandits were all over the dead suburbs. There was a hobbyist in Orange who started putting together radios constructed of vacuum tubes and thick copper wire that was powered by a hand-cranked battery. Lewis thought it looked kind of steampunk, and not to mention the fact that it was also very heavy, but he would love to start using radios again. Lewis walked over to Meredith, who was rubbing her thighs from the ride. She wasn't a vicious rabbit, so she wasn't used to humping dozens of miles per day like his group. He helped her off with her backpack and resisted the urge to pat her butt. They were just married, but this trip was all business.
Hell of a honeymoon.
Didn't I say I'd take you places?
Meredith said, giving him a seductive wink. Her green eyes still caught him off guard.
Well, our friends are inside. I had our people sweep the adjacent rooms along the conference room itself.
I appreciate your diligence, Boo, but Do you really think these guys are a threat? They're with the government.
First of all, I'm not taking any chances, even if their intentions are good. Second, the government? They ceased being the government a long time ago.
Lewis escorted Meredith past two Secret Service agents who were dressed in matching khakis and black Kevlar vests with police printed in giant yellow letters. They were missing their earpieces for the radios, of course, but otherwise, they looked like they belonged to another time. The office park was located directly across from a Ross Dress for Less outlet. They walked inside up the stairs of the atrium and into an office that had been an NSA offsite.
So you sure you can trust this guy?
Meredith took his hand and gave it a quick squeeze before letting go. They were married, but neither wanted to show the nature of their relationship to the remnant of the federal government.
We were acquainted from before. I interviewed him a few times.
Meredith Speet for the New York Times had given her access to meet with some of the players in the government, the Director of National Intelligence being one of them. A vicious rabbit and a Secret Service agent stood at the doorway, and they walked into a nondescript office where a tall gentleman wearing a suit stood. A suit. Lewis hadn't seen anyone wearing a suit since the early days. He vaguely recognized him from TV. He was that guy that looked like a funeral director.
Director Claiborne, it's good to see you're alive.
The two shook hands.
And you, Miss Dunham, or should I say Mrs. Henry?
Meredith and Lewis looked at each other, surprised, and Robert chuckled.
I might not have the use of bugs anymore, but I have eyes. You two hide your relationship well. But, well, there's chemistry. That and the ring on your finger. It wasn't there last time we met.
Meredith blushed, her freckles becoming more pronounced.
Well, I suppose I should be flattered that despite giving evasive answers to my questions, you were paying attention to me at least.
Robert then extended his hand to Lewis and they shook.
I heard you led the vicious rabbits to liberate Culpeper from that gang and later did the same by ridding Orange of those Obsidian Corps goons. You're quite a leader.
Lewis tried to hold back his surprise. Camp David was hell and gone from the outskirts of the Blue Ridge Mountains by today's standards.
Reverend Luevno's our leader, and she wouldn't stand to see our neighbors being enslaved by white supremacists and opportunistic defensive contractors. Contractors, I believe, your administration used a lot in the sandbox.
Meredith shot him a look.
Sorry, Director. I'm just a jarhead. I call it like I see it.
Something I appreciate.
My husband's a little brash sometimes, but he's trained up a ragtag team of Unitarians, migrant farmers, and high school kids and turned them into a true fighting force.
By Gaia's grace.
Meredith nodded, accepting Lewis's newfound religion, though she held on to the outdated notions of a rational universe that was in itself not sentient.
You and I have a lot to discuss, Meredith. While Camp David cannot insert itself into this new world...
Actually, why can't you?
Lewis, please.
No. I would like an answer. All y'all were eager to send all of us out to take down Saddam and leave me and my men to deal with an insurgency. But when it came time for you to step up for your own people, you bugged out like a...
Lewis stopped himself. He knew venting his personal frustrations wasn't why Meredith agreed to meet with the director when that group of Secret Service agents arrived at their gates last month to deliver a message. But it was guys like Director Claiborne who sent him to Iraq and got his men killed.
It's okay, Lewis. He's a friend.
My apologies, Director.
No apologies needed, General. We at Camp David are inadequate to the task of ensuring a civil society now. But you, your people, and other similar communities that share our values can. And I can help be the eyes and ears for you. But I must speak with Meredith in private.
Meredith gave him a nod and he stepped aside. Before leaving, he added,
Just some friendly advice. I ditched the old motorbikes for some horses. Or better yet, bicycles. We could hear your engines from 2 miles away.
Sound advice. We were hit with another EMP this morning and had to change out the spark plugs.
Lewis walked out and joined his vicious rabbits to pick the remains of the Ross Dress for Less for underwear and socks, while Meredith and director Claiborne forged the beginnings of what would become the Raven Institute.
This is your captain. We've reached our cruising altitude and should have you on the ground in 4 hours and 2 minutes.
Lewis never thought he'd ever be on an airplane again. A few daring souls back home refurbished some prop planes and used a fuel that passed muster, but they were basically playing Russian roulette, hoping that Gaia didn't send another EMP while they were airborne. Among the many things Meredith learned from Robert, or Ross as he was called, a couple of geologists that were fortunate enough to be evacuated with the president's staff to Camp David explained that the shift in the Earth's magnetic poles was taking place, and that was what caused the EMPs to strike at random intervals. Sometimes there would be several in a day. Other times weeks would go by without any surges. Lewis took no small pleasure folding his arms in self-satisfaction when Meredith told him what she had learned.
See, honey? The Reverend was right. She said Gaia was the source of the EMPs, didn't she?
Yes, she did. But she didn't have any scientific data to establish that. Only those voices that she and you hear.
You still owe me.
Lewis smiled at the memory as the plane suddenly jerked.
The captain has put on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seat until the sign is off.
Lewis didn't know what he'd say when he'd reach Meredith. She was a native to this world. She never even met him, no less marry and have 3 children with him. Instead, she was married to some mope named Clint Bauer. Lewis queried his wife on the go-to social media sites and found that she posted daily. It was insane that the woman who was head of the Raven Institute, whose very identity was a closely guarded secret in his world, would be posting about her daughter's science project, showing the name of the school along with inane things like cat videos. Lewis spent hours combing through Meredith's feed. Years of another life. He established that she was now the lead editor at the San Francisco Examiner. Clint, an accountant of all things, and she had 2 daughters, Phoebe and Olivia. The girls looked similar to Shonda and Esther, but they had pale skin, with both of their parents being white. Lewis noticed something on Meredith's feed. There was a gap that started 2 years ago. Lewis initially hoped that meant that maybe Meredith became Isekai herself. But when she started posting again a year ago, she resumed her posts like there had been no such gap. Most were dedicated about her work and their younger daughter Olivia. After finding his way to the San Francisco Examiner from the airport, thanks to that nifty map app, Lewis walked into the lobby and looked up Meredith Dunham. She used her maiden name here. Lewis got into the elevator, suddenly realizing he was more scared than he had been since the war. What would he say to her? Even after years of marriage, she could melt him with a smile. And who was he? Just some cholo off the street. On his way to her office, Lewis stopped to take a look at himself in the reflection of a glass case. His cheeks were chubbier than he was in the real world, but he had fewer wrinkles. The suit that he was wearing was like a Halloween costume, that the kids post-shift wore, mimicking the desiccated corpses in suits along the highways. But it fit looser as he made his flabby body lose a few of those sedentary pounds.
Gaia, guide my words and don't let me fuck up.
Satisfied he looked as good as he was going to get, Lewis walked into Meredith's office, where the receptionist was on the phone. Ultra-thin TV screens were on the wall. One was tuned to a local news station, discussing the protests of Amazon and Google agreeing to partner with the administration to have access to their customer data. Hi, can I help you?
Yes, my name's Lewis Henry. I have an appointment with the editor-in-chief.
The receptionist gave him a puzzled look. Are you sure it's today? Lewis nodded. In reality, there was no such appointment. He hadn't dared reach out to Meredith beforehand. He just hoped to get to see her, and then he had no plan. I'm sorry, but she's in New York.
Really?
Yeah, she left this morning. She'll be there the entire week. Lewis forced a smile, said he would reschedule, and walked out. When he got to his rental, he resisted the urge to punch the windshield. He pulled out his iPhone and looked Meredith up on Litter. And lo and behold, she posted from the gate in San Francisco an hour ago saying how excited she was to attend this conference for protecting journalists in the authoritarian age. They had been in the same concourse together a couple of hours ago. He arriving in San Francisco and she preparing to depart. They were just 2 gates from each other.
Damn it. I should have paid attention. I should have kept my eyes peeled.
Lewis wasn't going to make this costly trip meaningless. He knew where Clint worked thanks to his Facebook profile. He located the Mope's car from a post where he crowed about Olivia getting her driver's license. In that post, it showed a partial license plate number. Lewis was not an investigative journalist like Meredith had once been, but he learned to be observant over the years. Lewis followed him back to Clint and Meredith's home in San Mateo. He had no idea what he was doing. Technically, it was called stalking, but he considered it a intel gathering hop. Lewis waited and saw Olivia riding her bike returning from school, and was struck by a jumble of emotions. She looked like Esther, but with straight brunette hair and light skin. She wasn't his daughter. His children were impossibly far away, and he would never see them again. Phoebe didn't show up, but she was older and probably was in college. Hours passed. Lewis was about to doze off in the car when he heard the garage door open and that weird electric SUV pulled out and drove off. Lewis followed at a distance, making sure not to spook Clint, though he doubted the wife thief was paying attention. None of the natives here seemed to be present about their surroundings. Clint parked outside a Holiday Inn Express, which got Lewis hopeful.
Oh, so you have a secret rendezvous, eh, Mr. Bond?
Lewis followed Clint at a distance into the motel and was struck by the memory of having to take out a sniper holed up at a Holiday Inn Express on the outskirts of Lynchburg during the war. Clint walked past the elevators and into a conference room. There he saw a sign which read, "Healing Together."
Oh, geez, what's Clint's sob story? That he has bad Wi-Fi?
Lewis followed him in and took a seat. Clint gave him a warm smile. Over the course of the meeting, Lewis gathered that this was a grief support group. He was disappointed. He had hoped that he could catch Clint having an affair. Lewis was about to walk out when Clint was called on to speak.
Hey, it's been 2 years today. Sometimes it feels like I've been living with this for decades. Other times it's like it just happened. Phoebe, when we found her, still see her limp body on the bathroom floor.
All this time, Lewis had been building a case against Clint, the man that took his wife, took his children, took the life he had from him by simply existing. The anger immediately disappeared. He saw the look on Clint, that look on too many parents back in his world, the grief of parents who lost a child due to preventable illnesses that they no longer had the means to vaccinate.
I used it the other day, that bathroom, and for a moment, I didn't associate it with her. You might say that's progress. I hated myself for not remembering, even if it was for just a second.
Lewis's shoulders slumped. When Clint finished, the moderator called on him. For a moment, Lewis felt trapped. He could run. He could say he was just here to listen. But then suddenly, he wanted to speak. He didn't know what he would say, so he made up the first thing that came to his mind.
Hi, I'm Lewis. I lost my family to a drunk driver. It's been longer than it feels.
He didn't know why he made up the drunk driver story bit just then, but something about it felt real.
They're gone. I try to tell myself that I can go on, that I'm just gonna listen, if that's okay.
After the meeting, Lewis attempted to slink out when Clint sidled up to him.
Hi, Lewis. You new to the group?
Lewis nodded.
I'm visiting from D.C. Business. But I thought it might be good to try a meeting out.
You have any work colleagues or friends in the Bay Area?
Nah, just me.
Well, I was going to get myself a boba tea before getting one for my kid. Would you care to join me?
Lewis had no idea what a boba tea was, and he certainly did not know why he said yes. But here he was, sitting with the man who had his life. Clint asked him what business he was into, and Lewis said he worked for Raytheon, the company he quit from 6 weeks ago, and offered nothing more.
You don't have to say anything. That's cool. But if you don't mind, I feel like I need to bend someone's ear.
No problem.
Clint told him about the tragic event 2 years ago. Phoebe had purchased some diet pills online, and they were laced with fentanyl. Lewis couldn't believe how sordid this place was. This world was full of weekly shootings and drug overdoses. No wonder why Gaia wiped the slate clean. Clint looked down at his tea.
It's the 2-year anniversary, and my wife's decided to fly all the way across the continent.
Maybe she needs to go.
Clint shrugged.
Yeah, it's important. She's the chief editor, and there's this conference for journalists about navigating in this. I don't know what your political views are, but I'm just gonna say it. Fascists stay with that 2-bit Mussolini in the White House.
You won't get any argument from me.
I mean, I get it. The world we live in now, journalists are considered enemies of the state, and they got to band together. But seriously, this is the 2nd anniversary. Meredith would have postponed arriving by one day.
Maybe she wants to avoid the memories.
Tell me about it. She was catatonic in the first month. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep. But then she did what I've seen her do so many times before. Dive back into her work and pretend it was all normal. Anything to avoid dealing with Phoebe's death.
Lewis nodded. They were fortunate not to have ever lost a child. But he also understood that Meredith was someone who was fixated on the Raven Institute. A part of her mind was always there.
I don't know. About the only thing Meredith cares about now outside of work is Olivia. They say that marriages don't usually survive the death of a child.
Lewis closed his eyes and grimaced.
You love her, right?
Of course I do. I mean, Jesus. You have no idea how lucky I am. She's way out of my league, and she's the best mother, period.
If she's anything like my wife was, she's always got a reason why you're wrong.
I thought I was the only one.
Lewis found himself chuckling. He asked about Phoebe, and Clint told him everything. Who she was, and what made her so weird and wonderful. He knew it must hurt to resurrect memories of a lost one, but Lewis also knew that it could make you feel close to them again. A bunch of new arrivals into Monticello provided Lewis and Reverend Luevano with information about a militia that had taken over the nearby town of Culpeper and was committing unspeakable atrocities against women and children and enslaving the rest. In the months since the EMP struck, there was no follow-up attack from Iran or North Korea. No sign of any government, friendly or otherwise. The world became lawless, and men like those survivalists were making the most of it. Reverend Luevano had made a decision. They weren't going to allow this to continue. This was their backyard. Someone had to stand up to them. Gaia made it clear. They were the ones to bring justice. Lewis had been training the Monticello defenders on some tactical basics. The group of teenagers from the National Archery Finals were the quickest learners, and he picked them to be the tip of the spear with him in the lead for the upcoming op.
I am not your rolling wheels. I am the highway. I am not your carpet ride.
Lewis had that song in his head for the last several weeks. He didn't know why. Whatever the reason, he was singing it softly to himself as he inspected the armory, which had once been his slave quarters. The irony of using a former slaveholder's mansion as the Unitarians' home to save others from slavery wasn't lost on him.
How we looking?
Lewis turned around to find Reverend Luevano standing in the doorway.
We don't have a lot of rifles or ammunition. And the rifles we do have are for hunting, not going into battle. If they're the same assholes who held you up back in July, that means they're heavily armed.
It's them, all right. No doubt about it.
We'll be outgunned for sure.
Dora gave him a smile, visible in the cave-like room, lit by a kerosene lamp.
At least we got the element of surprise. Nobody expects the militant Unitarians.
Her smile faded.
You're nervous.
Damn right I am.
Well, it's natural to be nervous, facing off against armed goons.
Is this supposed to be a pep talk, Rev?
But, once again, it's not death you're afraid of, is it?
Lewis put down the Sig Sauer pistol he was cleaning.
I'm afraid of fucking up. Again.
Lewis had come to understand that cursing was totally kosher with Unitarian reverends, especially with Dora. She let out more F-bombs than the whole Operation Iraqi Freedom during target practice. She was a terrible shot.
You're blaming yourself for what happened outside of Karbala.
Can you blame me? I led my men into a kill zone, and when an IED went off, I couldn't respond. I couldn't fire. I could barely lift my rifle. The gunny had to take over.
You had suffered head trauma. You were among the injured, General.
Will you stop calling me that? I don't deserve the honor, Rev. I'm just a washed-up lieutenant teaching a group of kids how to hunt vicious rabbits in the woods.
His thoughts bleeding into that terrible moment.
I heard a voice during the firefight. I don't know. I thought it was my cowardice, but it told me to hunker down.
Gaia told you that? so you could be here now.
Yeah, maybe. But what if I fuck it all up? What if I lead our people into a trap like I did the last time?
Dora grabbed Lewis's hand.
This is why you will listen. You will hear Gaia, and she will guide you.
Somehow, he knew she was right.
As we're walking past the cellars, we were coming to the servants' quarters. As austere as the quarters were,
Lewis stood in the
these
doorway to one of the
accommodations
slave
were
quarters.
far and away luxurious compared
It
to
didn't
the
house
slave
the
quarters
vicious
where
rabbit
work
stock of
was
hunting rifles, shotguns, and pistols, as it did in the early days, back when those were the only firearms they had. Rather, 2 straw mattresses and a mock stove were placed to represent the living quarters for the kitchen servants. It looked pretty much the way it did back when he, Vivian, Dora, her congregation, and the archery team first arrived in Monticello. Dora worked with the museum staff to get all the newcomers out in the fields to pull their weight, and he was recruited to stand up a security detail. Vivian was racing around clearing out the museum to make it habitable for hundreds of people. Lewis remembered being huddled on the floor in one of the guest rooms with dozens of other single men, hearing their snoring. Back during that first year, they were scared almost all the time. Of bandits, starvation, disease. But this place kept them safe and kept them alive. It was home. What he would give to return there now. His Monticello. Lewis strolled around the well-kept grounds as tourists were taking photos of Thomas Jefferson's estate, which overlooked Charlottesville and the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance. Monticello had not only served to feed and sequester the nascent community, it had also had a commanding perch. They could see any threat arrive from miles away. Seeing all these tourists about, a part of him felt like they were invaders, but with phones instead of rifles. Lewis made his way down the mountain to the gift shop and restaurant. Inside, a young mom and dad were struggling to corral their rambunctious toddlers, which made Lewis ache. Near the checkout, he heard a voice. It was very familiar. Someone was chatting with the old gentleman manning the register. He saw the back of her head. She had a long, tight weave, was a little thick, just as he was, but she had that same posture. He sidled up next to her and whispered,
Vicious rabbits never say die.
She whipped around, her weave nearly slapping him. When she saw who it was, she beamed.
General! Lewis.
Colonel! Kendra.
The two hugged. Lewis never thought he'd see his greatest protege again. He had pushed away the losses as best he could after the war. The Orange Pact won, but it cost Greater Monticello the lives of thousands of good people.
My Gaia, what are you doing here? I thought you were a native. Oh, damn, what happened?
It was after the war, a non-combat situation. I just became isekai 2 months ago. You know what that is, right?
Kendra raised a finger to her chin, urging caution.
Let's talk somewhere else. You never know.
He realized Kendra was concerned about sheepdogs. Robert had said there were other isekai out there, both good and bad.
Meet me at the Blue Ridge Artisans Forge. You remember where the foundry was? It's there. I'll be there in 2 hours.
Charlottesville had grown considerably in this world. Ramen joints sprouted up where shopkeepers sold pre- and post-shift products when Monticello expanded into the city after the liberation of Culpeper during the first year. While waiting for Kendra, Lewis found a changed downtown. On 4th Street stood a memorial for a young woman named Heather Heyer, who was murdered by Nazis almost 10 years earlier when they marched on the city to decry the removal of Confederate statues. Incidentally, Lewis heard the other day that the president was renaming military bases back to Confederate generals again after they were renamed a few years earlier to non-secessionist leaders who actually won wars and served the country rather than fight against it. All things considered, it looked like it was the Confederates who won in the end. Lewis parked next to the Blue Ridge Artisans Forge. Back in the world, it was one of Greater Monticello's most important factories. He half expected to see horses and bicycles where cars and SUVs were parked. Inside, he found a store filled with wrought iron and glass-blown artwork for sale. The pieces were advertised to be produced by local artisans who used the furnaces in the back. There was also a cafe because people here were never without their coffee and sweets. He walked up to the cashier who wore a t-shirt with an upside-down American flag.
Hi, I'm here to meet with Kendra.
And you're with...
Lewis rolled his eyes.
I'm with Thomas Jefferson Martyrs Brigade.
The answer to the challenge question irked Lewis. It was a joke started by some smartass in orange. One that Lewis never found too funny. Satisfied, the young lady nodded.
In that case, welcome. You'll head over to the foundry, but drop off all tech in the lockbox before going in.
Lewis headed to the back, where there was a sign that said no mobile or recording devices were allowed past the entrance. Lewis placed his iPhone and AirPods in one of the lockboxes. He opened the door to the cacophony of hammering, the heat of blast furnaces, and the screeching of circular saws. While some of the machines were powered by electricity, he saw men working manually operated ones, and some by steam. There was an array of recently blown vacuum tubes resting alongside artwork in the warming ovens. Lewis walked past some artists who smiled. Some he could have sworn he'd seen back in the world, teaching apprentices how to cast pistons out of spring coils cannibalized from dead vehicles. There was a series of steam engines in the back, the kind they built to haul equipment to the front by rail. To his right were radios, vacuum tube radios, orange pack design, the kind that had to be cranked to work, the kind that could endure any EMP. Lewis's jaw went slack. It felt like he walked back into his world.
Brings you back, doesn't it?
Lewis turned around to find Kendra with her hands on her hips, looking upward. He followed her gaze and saw the flag of Greater Monticello.
It's been a while since I first saw you.
The chalice in flame inside the Eye of Gaia against a blue field hanging from the ceiling. Next to it was the flag of the Vicious Rabbits, a rabbit's head silhouetted above battle axes. The flag of his nation and of his core, his people.
Everything I can't remember, as fucked up as
I thought I'd never see our flag again.
Lewis's eyes welled up. He wasn't one to let others see him like this, but as Kendra put a hand on his shoulder, he cupped hers with his.
This is a safe space, General. No prying eyes, no sheepdogs. This is Allied land, and we got a good deal for the flags on Etsy.
Kendra led Lewis outside to a loading dock, where radios and steam engines were being loaded into crates.
Looks like you've taken our way of life and learned to make it into a marketable art.
She smiled, and they took a seat at a picnic bench as the cashier handed them a coffee. She lifted her cup.
To the things we said we'd missed from this world.
Louis raised his, and they enjoyed an honest-to-Gaia coffee. He remembered how in the early days, when it was just a couple of hundred of them, Kendra and the other archers would be up late at night talking about all the things they missed. She had just been a kid then. She grew up real fast and rose to become a leader. She died too young, like so many others who gave their lives in the war. Louis put down his cup.
I just wanted to say that the warriors under your command loved you, Kendra.
I trust Ibarra was able to finish the job.
Ibarra rose to the challenge, and your company made it possible for us to breach the compound. You should have been there, Kendra. My bad.
Well, I tried, but I got all distracted with getting killed and emerging into this shithole of a timeline while my native self was getting her ass handed to her by the sick pigeon.
So you not only have to die there, you also have to get the super flu here.
Apparently so. Ross, you met with Ross, right?
Louis recalled that Robert Claiborne's call sign was Ross and nodded.
We met briefly. The old man stopped me from completing my mission.
What mission?
What do you think? Taking out the regent.
You were going to assassinate Pastor Dan Patterson, the personal guru to the president? That is so you.
Yeah. Someone has to. Look around you. They won. That maniac leveraged that litter app and the rest of social media, and now they're everywhere.
Tell me about it. I've seen sheepdogs combing Charlottesville as well as Monticello. We unalived a lot of logs and dogs during the war. Only makes sense a lot of them would end up here. The Pastor sheepdogs have 24-hour surveillance outside the gates to Monticello with their pole cams. We pay kids to smash them, but they put up more. They even have them surveilling the old church.
The church? I dropped by there. You know, talk about ungrateful.
What are you talking about?
Reverend Dora. There wasn't anything to commemorate her.
While touring this city, Louis dropped by the Unitarian Church and was dismayed that they made no effort to remember her service, like a garden or a pew in her name.
Why would they do that?
Because that's the thing you're supposed to do when your longtime serving reverend dies.
Kendra knitted her brows, confused. Then her eyes widened in surprise.
Louis, you don't know, do you? Reverend Dora, she's alive.
Louis shook his head.
No. She died of cancer. That would have happened to her here, too.
When she got diagnosed with it early on, Dora got treatment.
Louis leaned back, almost falling from the bench, and then it hit him. Robert Claiborne had congenital heart disease, which his native self was able to manage here. Dora, the cancer back in the world was a death sentence, but here?
Is she also isekai?
Kendra nodded with a wide grin.
The sick pigeon really is an infectious sucker.
Louis felt his spirit suddenly coming to life. His reverend, his leader. She was alive and well, and she was isekai.
For Gaia's sake, why didn't you tell me? Where is she? Is she in town?
I didn't know that you didn't know. And yes, she's got a church just west of the city, but...
Louis stood up from the bench.
Then what are we doing here? Where's the church?
Kendra grabbed his hand.
General, please, you can't see her. It's a trap.
He saw the look in her eyes. It was fear.
Louis, this is their world now. If you go to her, they will find you.
Join us next week for the finale to Ride the Wilderness.
And I'd like to give a special shout out to our first Patreon member, Emmett K. And if you like what we're doing here at Mixtape Stories, consider joining us on Patreon at Mixtape Stories, all one word, or at mixtapestories.net. In this episode, you heard I Am the Highway cover by Nicholas Sokolik and It's Been a While cover by Heather Schmidt. The following actors are available on Fiverr. Lewis Henry, played by Stefan Stewart, Robert Claiborne by Johnny Unitas, Kendra by Ebony LaShawn, Meredith by Ellen C., Reverend Luevino by Bree and Aaron, and Clint by Jordan W.